Hello there everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Here to bring to you today another quick tips for DMs. I wanted to talk more about how I use my education and knowledge of history to make my games and worlds feel that much more interesting and engaging for my players. And it comes down to a piece of writing advice I'd gotten a long time ago, and that was write what you know. So I use what I know and bring that into my games. But before I start breaking down how I do that, if you're new here to the channel, go on down there, hit the subscribe button, and become a regular member here at the Gamer's Den. Or if you've already gone on ahead and listed yourself on such an incredible roster of legendary heroes, then go on down to hit the like button and share the video far and wide. But now, let's actually start talking about this. So, one, and most obviously, looking at history, we see so many different events and scenarios and how wild things just end up playing out. Just astounding things, honestly. Like Mad Fighting Jack Churchill, as an example, is an interesting figure. He was a minor nobleman during World War II. He signed up for commando duty, not knowing what it was, but knowing that it sounded dangerous, and that's exactly what he went in for. He also took a Scottish broadsword with him, a longbow, and bagpipes. And he captured a German machine gun nest at one point with multiple German soldiers still alive using his longbow and his broadsword. Dude was absolutely bonkers. He just did incredible things. And he's not the only person from history that has done stuff like this. So you can absolutely look up all these different things and just have, knowing that there is a real world historical precedent, have different things like that put into your own world's histories. Come up with astounding NPCs that have these incredibly colorful stories and histories behind them that, statistically unlikely as they are statistically bound to have happened at some point anyways. The other thing that my knowledge of history allows me to do is you just see this broader sense of connectivity, how one thing feeds into the next. And it's actually a little bit of a tricky sticking point, because with at least how I experienced history being taught, it's blocked up. It's this event, and then you have this event, and then you have this event. And I get why it's taught that way. It's a little bit neater, a little bit tidier, a little bit easier to teach. But it does, that broken up nature kind of, unless a history teacher takes the time and effort to break down how there's an interconnectivity, it makes you think of these things as separate, unrelated events, or only tangentially related, when really, in many cases, they really feed into one another progressively down the line. And another interesting thing with history, when you're studying it and reading it, as you start breaking it down on more and more advanced levels, you start to look at how history is, you're basically looking back at history through a lens, and then the further back you're looking at it through another lens, and another lens, and another lens, and another lens, because you can only learn it through the lens of your own understanding. And to do that, you have to look at historical sources, which are people looking at things through the lens of their own understanding. Now, there might be some of you going down to the comments below and going, you have to remove all that subjectiveness and look at it as the most purely objective thing possible, and those are the sources you have to rely on. I get where you're coming from with that, but at the same time, going with something that's pure objectivity is like referring back to the annals, I want to say, where you had these scribes going, "Verily and yea, here in the 34th day of the year of our Lord 976, that the king doth decree that the tax on the peasantry be increased by 25%. Yea, on this year, the following week, of our Lord of 976, the peasantry hath risen in rebellion against the rightfully appointed ruler by God, and he hath gone forth and put them down." That's all accurate information, probably accurate information, but it doesn't point out anything about why were the peasants rebelling? How did the peasants feel about the tax? Was the tax involved in the peasants rebelling, or was it something else? Was there a bunch of disease ravaging through the place, and the tax was taking away too much food, and that's what caused the peasants to revolt, because they needed that food to be nourished and healthy and survive and not starve? Like, there's a lot of subjectivity there that has to be included because, as a point of fact, it is a relevant fact of history. How people feel about things is relevant to history. And how you look at and view things, while it might be personally relevant to you, there still is a broader context to be looked at there with how you feel looking back and reading about this history and learning all of these different angles of things. Just not to start a fight, that's not the goal here, but one of my favorite things to look at is the American Revolution. And then also the French Revolution, because the way I remember the French Revolution being taught after the American Revolution happened was the French were inspired by the American Revolution and how they threw off the yoke and the shackles placed upon them by King George, and they turned against the French nobility. And they overthrew them and seized governorship for themselves. It's like, that's one way to look at it, but it's not the whole story, because another way to look at it is that King Louis at the time, he was helping to fund the American Revolution in a massive way just so he could thumb his nose at the British and King George. Like, I want to say something like 80 to 90% of the gunpowder the American revolutionaries used came from France. Everything else came from Great Britain, basically. And so, the food, the clothing, the armaments, all of that came from France at a point in time when the French population was poor and starving to an incredible degree. So here's all these millions upon millions of francs leaving the country, going towards a revolution in another place that doesn't have a damn thing to do with the French people beyond it's a French king funding it instead of taking care of them. And this is a time when you have the First Estates and the Second Estates dealing with the Third Estate. The First Estate being the king, the nobles, and the Second Estate being the clergy and wealthy non-noble people. The Third Estate was the 99%, the rest of French society. And the Third Estate, coincidentally, were the poorest in society. All the wealth had been concentrated up into the Second and First Estates. The 1% of the population there. So everybody else in the Third Estate, the 99% of the rest of French society, was poor and starving. And here's this French king pushing millions upon millions of francs and sending troops to help train and support the American Revolution. Of course they were inspired. They were pissed off. Of course they overthrew the monarchy at that point. And so, but that's just another example of how, depending on the lens you're looking through, you can get a different picture when it comes to history. So considering multiple reliable sources is important. Hell, even unreliable sources can still tell you a lot, because this is a person either in that point in time witnessed to it or is collecting information on it. This tells you about not only unreliably some parts of that time, but also tells you something about the person writing down the information as well too. What stood out as important, what stood out as unimportant, what they just left out, what they deliberately left out, or things that they just didn't register as being all that fundamental, that really, if you had asked somebody involved in whatever was being documented, that they might have thought that was incredibly important. Just another example of this, when I was taking a World War II history class with Professor Cook, he had brought in a survivor of the city of Dresden from World War II. Now, she was just a very young girl at the time, but she closed out the end of her presentation by saying that she didn't know why the Allies had bombed Dresden, why they had decided to attack a civilian target like that. They just relentlessly bombed it. And she's not wrong there. They did bomb it. They dropped enough firepower on it that it created a firestorm, literally melted down the asphalt and caused it to run like liquid through the streets, kind of levels of heat and intensity. But she then capped it off by saying there weren't soldiers there. There weren't military targets there. There was no war, nothing for war that was in Dresden at all. That's not true. but it's still important because, this shows you how at least for her, from her perspective, from her point of view, from what she experienced, it was kept away from her. So either her parents did a great job keeping anything about the war away from her, keeping about it from being in front of her. But the thing is that the city of Dresden was a major traffic thoroughfare. It had rail lines going through it. It was a major part of shipping. So soldiers, war material, anything that they could need for that was going to be there. It was an important part. And it's unfortunate fact of reality. People decry, the targeting civilian infrastructure and stuff. Problem is infrastructure. Like, there's a reason why so many military bases aren't too far off from civilian infrastructure, from places that are densely populated. Like, it's because they use that infrastructure, and something at a place that's densely populated is probably going to have a massive amount of decent quality infrastructure, or is more likely to. So that means a lot of stuff can move through there pretty quickly, relatively reliably, and that's all stuff that the military can make use of, no matter where you go in the world. That's kind of how it is. Not that I'm trying to excuse anything, attacking, deliberately targeting, civilians is just insanely reprehensible on every single level. But, that's why war is hell. War is worse than hell because, war, there's bystanders everywhere. Hell, in theory, is where you kind of ended up earning your place there. In theory. But anyways, enough of me getting into personal thoughts, but that's another tricky thing with all of this too, is that, again, I said it earlier, but you're filtering everything through your own lens of understanding, and as long as it's got sources and data to back it up, it's not necessarily a wrong interpretation of things. Probably one of the most valuable lessons I learned about history was my most recent year in school, reading Hobsbawm and going over history and everything, is that it's like preparing a dinner. Like, even if you're getting steak, potatoes, and salad, okay, that sounds pretty simple, but you can always throw in salad dressing. What kind of salad dressing? I like Italian myself, but then again, my grandma also had this homemade salad dressing that's just absolutely to die for. And you can take that baked potato and make it a twice baked potato, adding in, bacon bits and cheese and all kinds of other seasonings with it. Some people like sour cream. I don't like adding sour cream to it. And, steaks, a good juicy medium rare steak with a good crust with all of the seasonings that you can want, salt, pepper, garlic, basted in butter as you're cooking it. That's just one way to prepare and present this information. But that doesn't mean that there's other wrong ways of doing it. Some people want to put whole cloves of garlic in when they're basting their steak. Other people might prefer something more along the lines of ranch or a vinaigrette for their salad dressing. They might find that to be more relevant in terms of preparing a presentation and a study on a historical subject. So it's all going to be potentially viable, and so that's what I bring into my games. So there's a lot of different ways to look at things, and because there's multiple sources, there's multiple takes on one particular subject. And so, like again, the French Revolution as an example, in the US, at least where I grew up and learned about it, it was taught more in the vein of the French were inspired by the American colonists to overthrow their monarchy, which it's not wrong, but you could see by just changing perspective a little bit and looking at more French sources that dive deeper into the history of it, that leaves a lot out. So you can look at multiple sources and gain a deeper, more thorough understanding of things. And also, despite how much some people say, facts don't care about your feelings, it's like, no, but you are going to have feelings about them, and that's a fact. So, and it's just a fact of the human experience. You can try to separate it out all you like, and sure, trying to separate out your biases is definitely a good thing. Trying to look at things as on a deeper level as possible is important, But you do have to make a choice about it at some point. You do have to decide how you want to feel about things, how you want to go about this, or what if your initial reaction was right or wrong. And so you bring that into this, you bring in that kind of depth and complexity into your worlds where you have multiple factions vying for survival, trying to do the right thing, doing the wrong thing in the process, or out to do the wrong thing because long term it's going to be good for them and whatever people they might be representing. It all gets so complicated so fast, but it makes it feel like such a living, breathing, and thriving world. And then you populate it with some very colorful characters, some interesting people for your players to meet, interact with, potentially fight, potentially make friends with, potentially become frenemies with. It's all possible, and studying history has allowed me to do that. But by that same token, I read a lot of fictional books. If you read a lot of fiction, which, come on, you're here at this channel listening to me talk about history, you probably read a lot of fiction. Introduce characters from that, take inspiration from those, and build your own characters, and have fun. That's the most important thing of all. You and your friends sitting at a table, sharing some drinks, some snacks, some food, and telling some good stories and having a fun time. But what do you think? Go on down to the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Did you like today's video? Did you dislike it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below and we'll engage in discussion. And remember, if you've made it this far, you must have enjoyed something about the channel and everything I've been talking about, so why not go down there, hit the subscribe button, and become a regular member here at the Gamers Den. But with all that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.